For years, Lincoln sold one of its most important SUVs in America with an unusual contradiction built into the story. The name was American, the luxury badge was American, and the customers were American. But the Nautilus itself was being assembled in China before crossing the Pacific to reach U.S. dealerships. That strategy is now heading toward an end. Ford says that beginning in 2030, it plans to shift production of some Lincoln vehicles for the U.S. market from China to factories in the United States. For Lincoln, this represents a major change in direction. But describing it simply as a return to American manufacturing misses the bigger story. Ford is reacting to a business environment that has changed dramatically around the Nautilus. The China-built SUV now enters the United States under heavy tariff pressure. Washington is also introducing tighter restrictions involving connected vehicle technology linked to China. At the same time, trade policy is changing the cost structure of the North American auto business. Together, those forces are making Ford's old manufacturing strategy increasingly difficult to defend. So the real question is not simply why Lincoln is coming back to America. The more important questions are why Ford moved Nautilus production to China in the first place, why that strategy stopped making sense, where future Lincoln models could be built, and whether American production will actually benefit buyers. This is bigger than the location of an assembly line. In today's auto industry, where a vehicle is built, where its electronics come from, and who controls its software, can influence the business almost as much as the product itself. And the Lincoln Nautilus has become a perfect example of how quickly those rules are changing. To understand Ford's new direction, we have to go back to the logic behind the China decision. The Nautilus was not always produced there. Its predecessor and first generation were connected to Ford's Oakville manufacturing operation in Ontario, Canada. But when Ford reorganized its global production network and prepared the redesigned Nautilus, China offered a different opportunity. China had grown into the world's largest automotive market. Ford already had manufacturing partnerships in the country, while Chinese factories were supported by a broad supplier base, advanced electronics manufacturing, and increasingly capable vehicle assembly operations. For Ford, one production base could potentially serve two major markets. Lincoln could manufacture the redesigned Nautilus in China for local customers and export the same model to the United States. Instead of supporting separate manufacturing programs, Ford could concentrate suppliers, tooling, and development around one operation. At the time, that approach had a clear economic logic. The second-generation Nautilus also fit the strengths of China's rapidly developing automotive ecosystem. It arrived with a much more digital interior, a panoramic display, connected technology, and an available hybrid powertrain. American customers responded positively. The new Nautilus became one of Lincoln's strongest vehicles, offering distinctive styling, a technology-focused cabin, and a hybrid option for buyers who wanted improved efficiency without moving completely to a battery electric vehicle. The vehicle itself was not the fundamental problem. The environment surrounding it was. Ford had designed the China strategy around global efficiency. By 2026, U.S. policy was increasingly focused on domestic manufacturing, secure supply chains, and reducing exposure to Chinese technology. A production decision that once looked efficient was beginning to look like a strategic vulnerability. The clearest financial warning comes from tariffs. According to Ford and recent industry reporting cited in the source material, a Lincoln Nautilus built in China and imported into the United States currently faces a combined tariff rate of 52.5%. That is not a minor surcharge. It can fundamentally change the economics of every vehicle that reaches an American dealer. When a tariff increases the cost of an imported vehicle, that cost has to be dealt with somewhere. Ford can accept smaller margins, push suppliers for savings, distribute costs elsewhere in its lineup, increase the vehicle's price, or use some combination of those options. But there are limits. Lincoln operates in a luxury market crowded with competitors including Lexus, Cadillac, Genesis, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Acura, and others. If the Nautilus becomes too expensive, buyers have alternatives. If Ford absorbs the additional cost for too long, the vehicle becomes less attractive as a business proposition. That makes the tariff much more than a political talking point. It directly challenges the reason for supplying the American market from China. Ford CEO Jim Farley has said tariff policy was the primary force behind the decision. Once Ford could see where that policy was heading, the implications became difficult to ignore. And the pressure extends beyond one Lincoln SUV. Detroit automakers are also concerned about potential changes to North American regional content rules that could add billions of dollars in costs. Ford already expects significant tariff-related pressure, even though a large share of the vehicles it sells in America are manufactured domestically. The Nautilus is particularly exposed because every American market unit begins its journey in China. Moving production to the United States will not make manufacturing free. American labor, new tooling, factory conversion, supplier changes, and regulatory compliance all cost money. But those are expenses Ford can plan around and control more directly. An unpredictable import penalty is much harder to manage. And even that is only part of the pressure pushing Lincoln toward a new manufacturing strategy. The next issue is less obvious to consumers, but it could become even more important than tariffs. Modern vehicles are no longer purely mechanical products. They are connected digital systems filled with cameras, sensors, microphones, wireless communications, navigation services, driver information, software, and over-the-air updates. That has turned automotive technology into a national security concern. The U.S. Department of Commerce finalized restrictions covering certain connected vehicle software and hardware associated with China or Russia. The concern is that covered technology could potentially expose sensitive information, allow remote access, or create other security risks for vehicles operating in the United States. And the rules arrive in stages. Restrictions involving covered software begin with model year 2027. Certain vehicle connectivity hardware restrictions take effect with model year 2030 or January 1st, 2029 for components that are not tied to a specific model year. That timing is extremely important for Ford. The 2030 hardware deadline closely overlaps with the year Ford says it intends to begin shifting some Lincoln production for American customers back to the United States. That does not mean every component in a Chinese-built Nautilus is automatically illegal. The rules depend on factors including ownership, control, jurisdiction, specific technology, and supply chain relationships. But automakers cannot redesign complex electronics at the last minute. A future vehicle's software architecture, electronic control systems, connectivity hardware, suppliers, testing, and certification are planned years before production begins. Ford cannot realistically wait until 2029 and then discover that a critical supplier or technology creates a compliance problem for a vehicle scheduled for 2030. So the company has a powerful reason to begin restructuring early. Reducing dependence on covered Chinese technology and building U.S. market vehicles inside a supply chain designed around American requirements gives Ford more control over that risk. The tariff makes Chinese production expensive. Connected vehicle restrictions can make the old system increasingly difficult to operate. Together, those pressures turn reshoring into something much more serious than a political slogan. But what exactly is Ford bringing back to the United States? This is where the announcement needs to be handled carefully. Ford has said that beginning in 2030, production of some Lincoln models for the American market will shift from China to the United States. What Ford has not released is a complete manufacturing roadmap. The Nautilus is naturally at the center of the discussion because American market versions are currently assembled in China. The source material also notes reporting that Lincoln is expected to import a China-built Corsair for the 2027 model year following the end of Corsair production at Ford's Louisville assembly plant. Beyond that, major questions remain unanswered. Ford has not publicly identified which American factory will receive each future Lincoln program. It has not confirmed whether today's models will simply be redesigned, whether they will migrate to different platforms, or whether future vehicles will replace them under different nameplates. There are several Ford facilities that naturally attract attention. The Lincoln Aviator is already assembled at Chicago Assembly Plant, while the Navigator is produced at Kentucky Truck Plant. Ford also operates major manufacturing facilities in Michigan, Kentucky, Missouri, Ohio, and elsewhere. But available factories cannot simply absorb another luxury SUV overnight. Every plant already has production commitments, supplier relationships, labor agreements, capacity constraints, and future investment plans. Adding another vehicle can require new body tooling, paint shop modifications, hybrid or battery integration, worker training, and extensive validation. That explains why 2030 is not as far away as it sounds. Automotive manufacturing decisions are made years in advance. Ford must determine the platform, plant, suppliers, capacity, investment requirements, and economics long before the first vehicle reaches the line. So Ford's announcement gives us a destination, not a finished map. The current Nautilus is still built in China. It is not already rolling off an American assembly line. What has changed is Ford's long-term direction. For Lincoln vehicles sold in the United States, an American manufacturing solution is becoming increasingly important. Bringing more Lincoln production into the United States also raises two obvious questions. What happens to jobs, and what happens to prices? Ford presents the strategy as another step towards strengthening its position as a major American auto producer, and the company says expanded domestic Lincoln production will support thousands of jobs. That message has political value, but there is also a straightforward business argument behind it. Luxury vehicles generally offer stronger margins than mainstream products. Placing a valuable Lincoln program inside an American factory can support assembly jobs, skilled trades, engineering, logistics, and suppliers connected to the plant. But there is an important distinction between American assembly and a completely American supply chain. A Lincoln assembled in the United States can still contain components sourced from Canada, Mexico, Europe, Asia, and other regions. Today's auto industry depends on global networks for semiconductors, displays, transmission components, batteries, electronic modules, and countless other parts. So reshoring final assembly does not mean every component suddenly becomes American. The more realistic objective is to create a supply chain that meets U.S. regulations, reduces tariff exposure, limits critical technology risks, and gives Ford greater control. And buyers should not automatically assume that avoiding a 52.5% tariff means a dramatically cheaper Lincoln. Ford may gain substantial economic room by removing that import penalty, but converting factories, purchasing tooling, paying domestic labor, changing suppliers, and introducing new technology all require investment. The vehicle being sold in 2030 could also be significantly different from the Nautilus on sale today. Ford could pass some savings to consumers. It could protect its margins. It could invest the money in additional technology or features. Or changing market conditions could absorb much of the benefit. What reshoring clearly does is remove a structural disadvantage that has become increasingly difficult for Ford to justify. It also sends a message to Washington. If Detroit wants protection from Chinese competition, policymakers can reasonably ask how much manufacturing Detroit is prepared to keep or return to the United States. With Lincoln, Ford is showing that it is prepared to respond. And Lincoln is not the only brand confronting this new reality. General Motors has faced similar questions involving the China-built Buick Envision. Across the industry, manufacturers are reconsidering where vehicles are engineered, where software is developed, where critical hardware is produced, and whether one globally shared vehicle can still serve multiple regions efficiently. For decades, globalization encouraged automakers to concentrate production. A company could manufacture a vehicle wherever the economics were most favorable and then export that vehicle to markets around the world. That model is now under pressure from several directions at once. Tariffs can erase the savings from overseas production. Cybersecurity rules can restrict technology. Local content requirements and subsidies can reward regional manufacturing. geopolitical competition can turn a distant supplier into a strategic risk. The result could be an auto industry that is less globally optimized but more regionally protected. Vehicles designed for China may increasingly stay within a Chinese production ecosystem. Vehicles intended for the United States may depend more heavily on North American factories and carefully screened technology. European vehicles may face their own pressure to localize production. That fragmentation can increase costs. But it also rewards manufacturers that already have flexible factories, strong local suppliers, and enough scale to develop different regional solutions. Ford has an advantage here because its American industrial base is already substantial. Aviator and Navigator are built domestically, alongside many high-volume Ford vehicles. The company does not need to build an American manufacturing network from scratch. Its challenge is deciding where to spend. Money committed to factory conversion cannot simultaneously be spent on electric vehicles, hybrids, software, autonomous technology, quality programs, or future trucks and SUVs. Lincoln therefore has to earn the investment. Returning production to the United States is not the final objective. Ford still needs future Lincoln products strong enough to compete with established luxury brands and newer technology-focused rivals. The factory decision is only the beginning. The product that comes out of that factory will determine whether the strategy actually works. So why is Ford preparing to bring more Lincoln production back to America? Is it a renewed commitment to domestic manufacturing? Or is Washington making the old China strategy impossible to maintain? The evidence in this story points to both. Ford already has major advantages in the United States: factories, experienced workers, engineering resources, suppliers, political support, and more than a century of history tied to American manufacturing. But there is no question that external pressure is accelerating the decision. A 52.5% tariff damages the economics of importing the Nautilus from China. Connected vehicle rules create deadlines around certain China-linked software and hardware risks. And the broader trade environment increasingly favors domestic production while making Chinese assembly more difficult for vehicles sold in America. Ford is choosing to adjust before those pressures become even harder to manage. That is why this story is more important than a simple headline about moving a factory. Nothing changes overnight. The Nautilus currently sold in America will not suddenly become U.S.-built tomorrow. Ford still has to determine factories, platforms, suppliers, investment levels, and exactly which future products will be involved. The transition is expected to begin in 2030, and several major details remain unresolved. But Ford's direction is no longer difficult to see. For the American market, the period in which one of the country's most recognizable luxury brands can rely on China as the sole manufacturing source for a key vehicle appears to be approaching its end. And Lincoln may not be the last example. As tariffs, software regulation, supply chain security, and geopolitical tensions continue reshaping the automotive industry, more manufacturers may have to choose between maximum global efficiency and greater regional control. Ford has made that choice for Lincoln. Now we wait to see where the future vehicles will actually be built, how many American jobs the shift ultimately supports, and whether customers receive a better value or simply a different manufacturing address on the window sticker. What do you think? Is moving Lincoln production back to the United States the right strategy for Ford? Or would the company have been better off preserving its global manufacturing model? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe for more automotive industry news, manufacturing analysis, and coverage of the decisions changing the global car business.